Good morning. My name is Betty Olson. The reading today is Luke 18, 9 to 14. He also told this parable to some who trusted themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, and even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted.
We're in the middle of this 15 texts from the Bible. Actually, we are kind of toward the end of it. I think this is number 10, where we've just taken pieces of the Bible. We've gone from Genesis. We'll end it at Revelation, and they're just kind of stories. And this one in particular, I think that there's more to it than what we realize. Jesus paints this picture where there's a temple, and on this side you've got this Pharisee. Now, the Pharisees were not priests or things. They were more like church elders, church officials. They had gained a reputation, though, where people respected them greatly and even feared them. You know, when they would come into the room, people would think these are the holy ones and everything like that. And so when they're at the temple, and he says that he's at the temple and he's praying and he's saying, you know, I do all this kind of stuff. I do all this great stuff and everything like this. I do all the things, I dot the I's, I cross the T's, everything's above and reproach and everything. And I'm not like those other people, and I'm especially not like this guy over here. And this guy over here, when Jesus just mentions that this is a tax collector, everybody that is listening within ears of Jesus thinks that he's talking about a lowlife, a sinner, someone that they all collectively hate. Not only is he a sinner, but they see him as a traitor. Now, tax collectors, by the very means that you were a tax collector, meant that you were of the Jewish faith, you were of the Jewish lineage, but you were working for Rome. You were actually working for the oppressors, the people that were actually the empire, the bad guys, the ones that everybody hated. The tax collectors worked for them. And not only did they work for them, but they were also known to skim some off the top. They could take and they could steal, and they were stealing from their own folks out here. And so everybody, if you were Jewish and you were listening to this, you're already thinking, that's the bad guy there. This is the holy guy right there. Jesus is going to finally give a story that gives the tax collectors his comeuppance, and we can all collectively hate this guy over here. But Jesus was known for whenever you thought he was going one place, he turned the tables on you. And what he did is he said the tax collector was just saying proudly, I'm all this and I'm all this. The Pharisee, the tax collector, is on his knees and he's beating his chest. Now, when people were in grief back then in the first century, if they were grieved, if they were heart-stricken, if they felt low life, they would sometimes hit themselves like this. They would take dirt, they would pour it over their heads and all this kind of stuff. And he is just having a moment here, and he says, have mercy on me. I'm a sinner. I'm no good, and all of this kind of stuff. And that's the one that Jesus says is going to walk home justified, meaning that's the one that's going to experience grace. That's the one that's going to experience grace. This guy is not. Now, we look at this as somebody that, we look at it as, okay, it's a lesson on judging other people. It's a lesson on thinking that we're all that, and that people that acknowledge their sins, are better and all this kind of stuff. But when I read this, I think that Jesus is actually teaching something. He's teaching this, but he's also teaching something a little bit more beyond this. He's teaching about being honest, about being our honest self. And the person, when I hear this story, that my heart goes out to is the Pharisee. Because the Pharisee, I think, the things that he is doing is an end result to a lot of suffering in his own heart. When we go to Christ, Christ does not just want us to admit our sins and all of this kind of stuff. The whole lesson here is that Christ wants us to share who we are, our honest self. He wants us to be real. He wants us to be who we are. And that means when we go to the altar, whatever we are feeling, Christ wants to hear about it. That's the message that Christ is really teaching. And this is the one where we screw up all the time. We're in the Midwest. We are in Nebraska. We are Nebraska Nice. That means we lie a lot. It is. We do not want to tell the truth because we're worried that if we tell the truth, it's going to shake things up. You know, when we're the people that if someone says, how are you doing? We say, life couldn't be better, you know, and inside, you know, the toilet is exploding and all of this kind of stuff, and we just feel miserable about ourselves and all of this kind of stuff. But we'll hide that. We will hold everything inside just to not rock the boat. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to tell people the truth about ourselves because if we did, it might make them uncomfortable, and that would make us uncomfortable. So Nebraska is just filled with people just walking around, you know, just going, I am well, you know, and just not ever trying to say anything other than that we're okay. You know, I do this all the time too. You know, there's times when I'm not my honest self either, and there's times when I have gotten myself into some trouble because of that. When I first became a pastor, now pastors, we have, every year we have several things that we have to go to. We have conferences, we have meetings, we have all of this kind of stuff. And if you think listening to one pastor is bad, try and being in a room with about 250 of them. I'm telling you, yeah, it is awful. And pastors, there are pastors that just, love to talk. You know, they love to talk. And there are pastors that whether they are here in church or whether at the store, they're given a sermon. Wherever, as long as they've got a group of people watching them, they're going to say all kinds of stuff. And I'm the kind of person that, believe it or not, I am an introvert. I am a strong introvert. And that just means this is how I recharge. You know, there's introverts, there's extroverts. Extroverts, in order to recharge, they like to be around people and they like to exchange and talk and all of this kind of stuff. And that's what really kind of gives them their energy and gives them their health. Introverts are the opposite way. We're not like the extroverts. We get shy, and when we're around crowds, it's okay. We can function on that, but we need the time to be able to go into our little room by ourselves and be alone and just kind of recharge. Does anyone acknowledge that? There, see, just by admitting that, we told the truth. Isn't that wonderful? We just said the truth there. Now, that's who I am. So when I go to these things that are like 3 days of just pastors going, how are you? Hey, and all this kind of, you know, and oh, Methodism and all this kind of, you know, and I'm just wanting to run away and hide and be by myself because I'm an introvert. It's also a little bit because they're annoying, but it's also because I'm an introvert. And so, but to me, that's the thing that I need to do to recharge. So when I'm at a place, it's important for me to have that time. But when I was first into pastoring, there was a conference that was coming up that I can't even remember where it was, but it was a drive and an overnight. It was like 3 nights. I got a call from a guy that I went to school with. And I didn't know him very well at all. But he called me up and he said, hey, I'm coming from Kansas, you're coming from Nebraska. What if we share a hotel and we'll just share the expenses? And inside I'm thinking, oh God, no. That's the worst thing that you could ever want to do. But I wanted to be nice. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I thought, if I tell this guy that I just want to be alone, he's going to take it personally. He's going to hate me. And then the whole conference, he's going to be giving me the stink eye. He's going to spread it around that Trevor doesn't like to be around people and all of this kind of stuff. And I'm going to look crazy and all of this kind of stuff. And so you worry about all this stuff. So I found myself saying, okay. And as soon as I said it, I knew I was doomed. I just knew I was doomed. And so I'm driving up there and I'm thinking, well, maybe he's an introvert too. You know, maybe he has to, you know, and we'll go to the hotel after the whole day of the, you know, hey, we'll go in, it'll be quiet, and we'll just we'll be on opposite sides of the room and we'll read, you know. Maybe that would be nice. It wasn't that way. I had the biggest extrovert that money could buy. He was an extrovert. To him, when the whole day's worth of annual conference and all of this kind of stuff, going back to the hotel, that's when the conversation to him started. I wanted to just isolate, and he is sitting there just like, let's talk about things, and just, oh, hey, and all that stuff. And I'm telling him, I tried to tell him, I'm tired, and I'm just going to relax and everything. And he goes, oh, okay, well, hey, and then he doesn't get it, Not only that, but his passion, it wasn't really about Methodism. It wasn't about Jesus. It wasn't about any of that stuff. His passion was politics. Now, I'm not real political. I'm not real political. But he spends, I didn't know this guy, but he spends his days listening to talk radio. He spends his days watching 24-hour news stations. And then he wants to talk about that the whole time. He wants to talk about nothing but his political views, and he wants to talk about anybody that doesn't share his political views is a moron. And that went on for hours. I was trying so much to just kind of isolate, I was thinking, I'm not going to interject here, I'm tired and all this kind of stuff. And my body, from facing him started to slowly go this way, And I thought maybe he'll get the hint, do you see that you're talking to my back, But he didn't stop at all. And he kept going and going and going and going and going till 2 a.m. in the morning. I was actually slipping in and out of consciousness during this time. And you would fall asleep and you'd wake up and he would still be in the same thread. He didn't even stop. It was just like the radio was on or something. And he just kept going and going. And this wore me out. I don't care what his passion was. It could have been grapes. It could have been, sausages. I don't care what he was talking about. I just needed some quiet time and I wasn't getting it. And for 3 nights that went on. 3 nights, and the conference, I would go from the conference of the hey, ho, hey, and all this kind of stuff, and then I would go into the hotel room at night, and it'd be like, hey, ho, and I had no time to recharge. And so I started to feel tired all the time. I started to feel just nasty and grumpy, and I just wasn't in a good spot. By the time that I came home, it took me a while to even get into the mode where I could recharge again. And it was all because I wasn't honest. It was all because I told this guy, yes, he had no idea. He had no idea that I was an introvert. He had no idea that I was a person that needed alone time. He had no idea that I didn't want to sit up and talk all night. I didn't tell him. I just told him yes. And that's the dishonest part. Now jump ahead to last week. We have a conference, another one, coming up in October. And it's another, you got to drive there, and I think it's in Kansas somewhere. And we got to drive there and got to get a hotel, again, for a number of nights. I get an email from a pastor that lives here in town. And he says, I have a great idea. How about we share a hotel and not just do that, let's drive together the whole time. So for several hours, let's talk, we'll drive and all this kind of stuff. And I see this email, it was right before I was heading out to mow the lawn. And I'm just thinking about it the whole time, and I'm mowing the lawn there, and I'm just, I'm constantly thinking, oh, what am I going to tell this guy? What excuse could I get COVID? Maybe I could just get a little bit of COVID and just tell him I'm infected or something like that. Maybe I could say that I'm already staying with somebody, or maybe I could say that I'm driving back and forth. That doesn't make sense because it's like 4 hours and all this kind of stuff. But I'm sweating bullets, and it's not even that hot out, but I'm sweating bullets because I have to tell this person either yes or no, and the thought of telling them the truth, the thought of sharing something about myself is frightening because I don't want to rock the boat, or I don't want to hurt his feelings, and I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. But finally, I stopped mowing, and how you self-talk to yourself. Does anybody ever self-talk to yourself? I said, Trevor, you are old. It's about time you started telling the truth. And it dawned on me that Nebraska Nice is not nice if you're not being honest with people. Nice, isn't the definition of nice actually being honest? Honesty is nice, isn't it? So I thought, I'm like a coach in my head, you can do this. You can go tell the person that you just want to be an introvert and all this kind of stuff. And so I get back to, after I finish mowing, and I email them, and I just say, hey, I really appreciate the offer, but I'm going to have to decline. And the reason I'm going to have to decline is because I am an introvert. And an introvert, for me, to take care of my spiritual well-being, my physical well-being, being around large groups of people all day, to take care of myself, it's really important for me to have a hotel room by myself where I can go and isolate. It's also important for me when I'm gearing up for something like that and winding down from something to drive by myself, to have that just alone time to do what I need to do. I send it. Never been more scared in my life. I don't know why. Just to tell that truth, I'm scared about this. But within about 5 minutes, he emails back, and he thanks me for my honesty. He said, I really, really appreciate your frankness. And I had to look up the word frankness to make sure he wasn't being passive-aggressive, because pastors love to do that. I really appreciate your frankness on this, But he really did appreciate the fact that I was actually not making an excuse, but actually just telling him what I felt. And I thought, you know what? That's exactly what we need to do more of. That's exactly what we need to do more of. By telling him the honest truth, by sharing who I was, we actually got a little bit closer. He's a good guy, and he remains my friend, and he's a good friend, and our friendship even strengthened because there was that honesty. There was that knowing of who I was. The fear of sharing became something of a hurdle, but once it was shared, it was one of those things like, well, why don't I tell people this? It's not like I'm, hiding bodies in the basement or anything like that. I'm just saying that I just don't like to be around people. There's not being around people, and then there's killing people. Not wanting to be around them is better. But the more that we share that, that's just one thing, but we often have things in our lives, whether we're feeling something, whether we feel a certain way, or whether we just don't want to do something. We've often said yes to doing things that we don't want to do because we just don't want to rock the boat. We hide things about ourselves. And sometimes that builds up on who we are inside, of what we're feeling and what we're going through. Sometimes we're going through really rotten times where we tell nobody because we don't want to upset anybody. When people ask us how we're doing, if we're actually really miserable, we don't say anything. Now, I understand when you're in the grocery store and you're walking by and they say, how you doing? You say fine because you don't want to stop them right there and say, oh, I'm having the time of my life, it's miserable. And meanwhile, their frozen vegetables are melting and you spend a half hour there. You do say the pleasantries, but when you're around people that you love and trust, why can't we just tell the truth? Why can't we be the person that we are inside? Because what happens when we're not, when we hold things inside, they start to magnify and they start to build. Me just wanting just to express that I'm an introvert and that I need to be alone, I turned that into a big dramatic thing by just worrying about whether people were going to accept me for that or not. I don't even know if the lawn got really good and mowed. I think I was all over the place on that because I was pontificating about what I was going to do. It became a bigger thing to me, and by doing that, by building that up, the more that you build it up, the more you feel different from everybody else. The more that you hold something inside, the more you feel that you don't have anything in common with somebody else. And what happens with that is it builds up on us. We start to think that we are the problem. We start to think if they only knew that I'm not really happy, or that I'm miserable, or that I'm insecure, or that I've been angry about something, or that I believe this way, or that we have differences, or whatever the case may be, I need to keep that to myself. And the more that I do that, the more isolated and alone I start to feel. Billy Joel once said that honesty is such a lonely word. It's because when we're not honest, we feel more and more alone because we have no one to share it with. We have no one to be in community with. And the more that we do that, the more we start to feel different, and the more we start to feel insecure about that. And the more we start to feel insecure about that, the more kicks in, this is human nature, a survival skill of trying to look at other people as a threat. We start to compare ourselves with other people. Whether we're in a good place or not, we are always, as human beings in community, we compare ourselves. We always do that. But when we're hiding stuff inside and we keep that inside, it starts to build up more. We start to see other people. And in order to feel better about ourselves, we start to think, well, at least I'm not that. You know, I've got these, I'm insecure and I have, you know, I'm an introvert and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I'm not that, but at least I'm not wearing that shirt that Brian's wearing, you know. And we start to find things that, you know, flaws about people because we want to feel better about ourselves. And we're all doing this in our head. And by the time that it comes down to it, we start to tell everybody in the world that we're fine, but everybody else is not. And that's where the Pharisee was. He was trying to tell God that he was just doing great because he wasn't those guys. And that's why I feel so sorry for him, because I know the road that he must have been taking, that road of hiding who he was. As a Pharisee, that's a big responsibility, and if he felt all insecure about himself or small, he could not say that. He had to carry this thing of authority. He could not share with anybody, and the lonelier and lonelier he got, and by the time that he got to the temple, the only thing he could say is, I'm okay, and they're not. That was his only survival. By this time, I'm not even sure he knew who his honest self was. Imagine when you're able to actually open yourself up to somebody and say, I feel like this, the better you feel. He never got to experience that. That's why Jesus said that the tax collector walked home with grace, because he got to unload. He got to just go in there and be his real honest self and say, I feel like crap. And he got to go home because he was able to finally share that. The more that we can do that, the more that we can share with each other, the better we are. And the more that we share with each other, the more we find that we have things in common. We have a Pharisee and a tax collector there that are identified by their roles. That's the only thing that we know in this story. But imagine if they started talking together, and one of them said, you know, I'm Jewish, but I sneak some bacon every once in a while. And the Pharisee said, oh, you know what, I do that too. I love a good BLT, you know? And the more that they shared, the more that they, even though they were on opposite ends of the world, even though they had vast differences, the more they could have had in common. Instead of being strangers that saw each other as either better than or less than, they could have been neighbors. And the more that they shared, the more we share as neighbors, the more we can become friends. And Christ, who knows you, whether you want to hide it or not, he knows what you are. He knows what you did. He knows how you feel. And what he wants you to do is be that honest self with him. He's not looking for a show. He's not looking for us to try to be our best. He's looking to meet us where we are, our honest self. Would you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, help us to be honest. Help us to share honesty. If we're upset with somebody, help us be okay to share it. If we disagree, help us to be okay to share that and be okay with that. If we feel things like happiness, let us share that. But if we feel things like fear or loneliness, let us share that too. Let us have people in our lives that we can tell our honest truth to, that will accept it, welcome it, and also share who they are. That's how we build a community. That's how we share the love of you. Help us to remember to do that. In Jesus' name, Lord, we pray. Amen.